Hi, I'm Katie. Thank you to Amy and the DePaul Animation Department for inviting me. So I'll get started. I usually, when I do a talk, I like to start with my student work because that was, and specifically when my second semester when I was a grad student at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. This was, I came to animation late in the game. I was a painter and a sculptor, and I was creating these sculptures in my studio and filming them. And when I was at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, I learned about 3D animation, and I was kind of drawn to it, not so much as an animator, but as more in like a conceptual manner, whereas in the 3D XYZ space, you can set it up kind of like a sculptor in a virtual space and use the virtual camera to document like these virtual objects. So I'll just get started and play the first one. Okay. Oh. This one is called Monument, and I made it in 2011. Okay, so yeah, that was my first successful attempt. I made a lot of like really bad 3D animations before that were very wonky, but that one was like the one where actually like things kind of worked out. And as you can see, it's based on like this idea of not so much like building a narrative and having with storyboards, but actually like working on like building an object, a virtual object, and then making a movie about a virtual object. And around the same time, I was also just like making a lot of physical like things in my studio. So building costumes and paint. I was kind of I was a failed painter, I would say. Like I kind of like to revel in the fact that my painting failed, because then it became like a kind of way to, like it became more about like the process of how to use painting in a more like mediated way where I'm like separated from it. So I'm going to show this piece, sorry, that I don't necessarily consider like a great animation because it's very crude, and I was using a lot of like special effects like that I had seen in kind of like cheesy music videos. But it was kind of like a gateway to creating the animations that I'm making now. And I think like as a student, it's important to kind of like make work that maybe isn't like necessarily like great, or that is definitely like to take a risk and make work that's maybe a failure, but you have to make that work to get to the place that you're going. So it's like that first animation kind of combined with what I was working on in this piece kind of like got me into where I am now with my work. Okay, so I'm talking too much. Okay, let me play it. Okay, this piece is called Defunct. So I think what was important about that piece to me and my figuring out my process was not so much like the end product, but that I was learning how to deconstruct the video of the figure, right? So it had this kind of, I started to develop this kind of experimenting with the physical world, building stuff in the physical world, videotaping it, then bringing it into the computer space, kind of pulling it apart and making it flat, and then trying to make it have form in a purely kind of digital world. And so that was like one of the pieces where I started to really like break it apart. And it's kind of like, I feel like it's me experimenting kind of in real time. When I watch it, that's what it feels like to me. So, so I was making these these more like this 3D stuff. And then I was also making these videos just with like After Effects and like me performing in these costumes. And for my MFA thesis, what I wanted to do was kind of bring those worlds together, bring in the 3D into the kind of filmed kind of After Effects kind of material. So this is a piece called The Calm After the Storm. It's an installation piece. It's best seen as a projection, and here, I'll just play it. Oops. Okay. So in the gallery, this piece usually plays on a loop. So it's kind of presented as a like this virtual totem, virtual sculpture. Okay, I'll stop it. Okay, so I'm going to talk a bit about my process. So usually I'll start with a kind of like a 2D collage of just like things that I'm interested in, my ideas. And I would say that this particular collage is like kind of represents like in kind of total of what a lot of my work is about, and still to this day. So I'm mixing consumerism, like plastic toys, like My Little Pony, Barbie, kind of my experience as a child growing up in America as a consumerist, mixed with like my concerns about the environment and what it's doing to our bodies, specifically like female bodies, and kind of mixing that in with the history of like the figure in modernist art. So I won't talk too much about it because I know we're gonna talk after the presentation, but I'm just gonna show you guys what my process was for making that piece. So first I started off building a model in my studio. It's like very painterly, and I went to the thrift store and just like found like kind of throwaway objects and made this kind of like base, and it was like a 2D but slash 3D city. You can see there's like old toys, and I think that's like, I don't even know what that is, like a piece of a Barbie or something. And then next we brought it into the studio and filmed it. And this was kind of what the video, a still from what the video looked like. Right, so I made this kind of like sculptural base physically. And so then I filmed it, and then I took the footage and I brought it into tracking software, right? And so what's so great about being an animator right now is that you can use any of these softwares, right? And you could just use them at home on your laptop. You could really like, you know, and you can make something that has like a real DIY aesthetic. So, and then I brought the video footage with the tracked software and made a virtual camera based on the movement of the real camera. Right? So it's like really like using kind of like Hollywood effects, but to make an art installation. And so then I continued building. So it was like I made this like 3D sculpture, flattened it, and then tried to make it 3D again, but in a virtual space by building on the footage with like virtual objects. Right. And this is kind of like a work in progress, kind of like building up the frame around the footage. And this was just kind of the end product, right? So this is a shot from an installation shot from a group show I was in at Postmasters Gallery in New York City. And so then I wanted the piece to also, like in the gallery, have some kind of presence, like it's an object, but still like also like kind of talk to like the flatness, right, of that the screen is like flattening out the virtual 3D object. Right, so the screen was like about 60 inches, which was like a little small for me, but yeah. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to show is a piece called Dream House. I created this piece when I was a fellow at IBeam in New York, and this piece is a little bit different than the work that I'm doing now and the work I was doing previously because it's a real-time simulation. So I created it using gaming software, and it's a 2-hour simulation. This is just like a 2-minute clip, and I'm still working with like the same ideas. So it's the female figure, or the female, but also whose body is also like an architectural structure, and she's spitting out these objects, like garbage objects, kind of like household debris, and she's kind of like, you know, she's being a consumer. She's using these things and then kind of spitting them out into the world. Although she is the landscape, she is the environment, so the objects are building up on her body. And so each time the simulation played, it was a different kind of sequence of how the objects would build up. So it would make a new structure each time the video or the simulation was played. Okay. So sometimes like it was interesting because it's like once you play the piece, it kind of just had like, it had a mind of its own, like to show this still, because one time it just like caught on fire, which is like burning the whole time. I thought that was pretty cool. Okay, so up until, let's see, when was like around 2014, I was making these more like totem figures. So everything was based on kind of a building or like a standing figure, you know, and kind of like this classical, like almost think of like a contrapposto standing figure. Then I became interested in just like other kind of tropes of like an attractive female, like poses throughout art history, and also like that can also be seen in contemporary advertising. So I was looking at like sculpture of like the odalisque, the figure like lounging, and then also at the same time I was working in doing freelance and like advertising, like doing pharma and working for MTV, and I was working with a lot of like stock footage, and I came across this really cheesy like beach video of this model of like sitting on this floaty device, and just like, you know, her relationship to the camera, right, is this, she's like a seductive object, right? So when the camera comes to her face, she turns and kind of looks at you and seduces you. And as you see in the previous piece, there's also, even though she's an architectural structure, she still has the character has a relationship to the camera where she's trying to seduce. So I was interested in that, but then I also wanted to combine it with like what is actually happening to our beaches, right? Which is like buildup of plastic. I think this is a beach in Hawaii, right, where just like plastic debris is built up, and then also our change in our geology. So kind of like plastic rocks, plastic washing up and melding together with rocks to create this new idea of nature. So like how do I combine these two ideas of like the seductress, what's used in like in contemporary or like throughout history, right, as a tool to like seduce people, but also like combine that with my concerns, right, about the environment. So I made this piece called Breathe Deep in 2014, and I'll just play it. Okay, so then in that piece, right, she wasn't just a building. Now she becomes more like a landscape. And in that, this piece as well, I started thinking about how GIFs could also be kind of like a sculptural medium, right? So I'm bringing video footage into this virtual space and 3D objects, virtual 3D objects, but then also like video itself could be like exist inside the XYZ virtual plane. So that's why I like this idea of like GIFs can be like a material, like a plastic material. And then there's another piece that I made, which is purely 3D, but also based on like the same idea of like the odalisque, but with this, you know, the decayed rocks and like toxic fluids. And this piece is called "These Rocks Won't Lose Their Shape." So it's a reference to the Marilyn Monroe movie, where it's like they're comparing like the diamond to like the female body, right? So. Okay, so it just loops. It's really meant for an installation type of format. Okay, I'm gonna move to the next piece. So this still is from a solo show I had at the Rocky Mountain School of Art and Design in Denver, Colorado. And this is a shot of two different pieces. I'm gonna focus on the piece on the left, but at the time I was becoming more interested in consumerism and how it works with like social media, specifically like Instagram. And so a lot of my work is about like, what is the definition of natural in the environment? Like, is there like a new, we're creating these like new types of like substances. Are those considered natural, right? Or how like plastic is kind of infiltrating everything. And so I was kind of interested in the idea of like, on Instagram, how like you can just build your own identity, and like we don't know if things are real or not when people are advertising. We're not sure if they're really advertising or if they really like something or they're just being personal. So I was also interested in that kind of how advertising has kind of shifted to a more personal space. And so I made a group of pieces that were based on Instagram like tropes of selfies. The first piece, and they were a series of 6 videos, and the piece overall is called Real Self Cindy. And so it's a character who is kind of trying to find her real identity through augmented reality and like changing her body and projecting or performing this identity on Instagram, and that's like her real self. It's more real than the actual like who she is in a physical sense. So this is the first one. This is the Duckface Selfie. And they're just like 15-second looped pieces. Here's the ab selfie, right? Showing off your abs. in this one, I also like the idea that this person is like in their bedroom, and then they're in their like private space, and then someone, but they're like in their private space. It's really private, but they're like have this dialogue with like the, you know, the whole public, but they don't want to show the person that's actually like living with them. You know, it's like, right. Okay, so this is a bathroom selfie. This is posing with like a plate of food. That's supposed to be really tasty. And then, yeah, the butt selfie, right? The butt is this like object. And there's all these different like poses that people do to make their body look a certain way. So it's like she's kind of trying to make things look more round, I guess, with her pose. Here's the beach selfie, right? So aiming the camera, having the camera at a certain angle, so everything looks perfect. And then out of that piece, I created this other piece, which is kind of like these two kind of Instagram videos, but they're stacked on top of each other to make more of this like back to like this kind of like totem imagery that I was working with before. And this piece is called On the Beach. Here's the video. Okay, and then around the same time, I also made this other installation called Low Tide, and it was for a solo show that I had at Up For Gallery in Portland, Oregon. It was a 3-channel video installation, and again with like a beach theme, but it starred this mermaid character. I was interested in like this idea of, well, I grew up when I was younger, like you know, one of my favorite movies was like the Disney Little Mermaid, and this idea of like the fantasy or like the commercial kind of fantasy of what the beach looks like, and then there's like the reality of what's happening with our ocean. So I was interested in this idea of low tide. So when the tide is as the low tide is kind of like a liminal space where the ocean, the water goes out really far right before a tsunami, and it's like kind of the beach kind of like opened up. This world is opened up to humans, where you can kind of come in and like look at this space that's usually off limits, but it's like a very dangerous space. And I just feel like that's kind of where we're at right now, in terms of like what's happening to our environment. And I'm just going to read this poem because it was based, this is like the inspiration for this piece. It's by a 20th century poet, Edna St. Vincent Millay. She's a feminist poet. So the poem is, these wet rocks where the tide has been, barnacled white and weeded brown, and slime beneath to a beautiful green, these wet rocks where the tide went down, will show again when the tide is high, faint and perilous far from shore, no place to dream but a place to die, the bottom of the sea once more. There was a child that wandered through a giant's empty house all day, house full of wonderful things and new, but no fit place for a child to play. So I liked all the imagery she was using of like, it's kind of like child like wonderment, but then at the same time, it's like right before something really horrible happens. So I'll play the piece, and I know I'm kind of running out of time. So. And I'm just going to skip through this really quickly. This was a site-specific piece that I made for a big billboard, LED billboard in Denver. I do a lot of stuff in Denver. And I'm just going to skip through it. And then I'm not going to show this one. And last, I'm going to show a work in progress. It's a piece I'm working on right now. And it's going to be like a longer kind of sequential piece, probably the most traditional kind of animation I've ever made. So it has no sound yet, and it's very much like a work in progress. Okay, I'll play it. So it's this character who's on a yoga retreat, and she's kind of reflecting on herself in the hotel.
Okay. Hello. So we're gonna, I'll talk to Katie for a little bit, and then we'll open it up to some question and answer. I just want you, when I've read about your work, you've talked about surrealism and Yves Tanguy and modernist artists. And I know you come from a painting background. I just want you to talk a bit about how that's influenced your work and what surrealism means to you and that sort of thing.
Specifically with Yves Tanguy, I was more interested in like that he was making this world where it seemed like he was making these like kind of virtual sculptures. But with surrealism, I like how it's also related to, there's like a literary component to it. And I feel like that is definitely, like when I was reading the poem, like I definitely like look at references that are more literary or more about like creating these kind of like surreal worlds that reference something that is like actually really like real, you know, like real emotions, and maybe you can't get to that place by showing something real, like you need to use surrealism to kind of get to like a truth, something like that. And I think that's what, yeah, I don't know.
And then what about modernist? You mentioned also like futurism and stuff like that, and just how that.
Well, I studied as a figurative painter starting when I was like really young. My parents had me in like this like classical drawing classes, and it's just like very much like based on, the single figure on a plane, kind of like in different poses. So, and then I would like go to the Met all the time and look at these painters that were usually all men. And I just like, it's kind of like ingrained in me, you know, like that's what real art is. But at the same time, I like have more like interests about like pop culture interests, and really like into, I always like was more interested in film really than painting. So it's kind of just like me trying to like digest that, or like the idea of like breaking down the figure. And that's what I'm interested in specifically with like futurism is just how like those artworks are kind of related to like the Industrial Revolution, you know, and like what was happening with humans and the machine, and like this idea of like, you know, the machine and the human body becoming more like a machine is like a good thing, and like how that relates to like war and aggression and stuff like that at the time. And then trying to think about like how that relates to like media now, you know, like with the human body kind of like we're always like sitting at the computer and like in these virtual spaces, and you know, I have like back problems because I'm at the computer, but then there's also like, the world is kind of like decaying around us. Just like kind of like to look back and see like how people are like dealing with like in industry, and like how it relates to what we're going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're becoming machines in a different way of like filters and commodities
like
of
more
ourselves.
Like a mental thing, and our bodies are like kind of like just like almost like waste, and we're just like our brains need to like go into the virtual space.
And then I want to know, so how do you make decisions about where to place the camera when you document your sculptures? Because a lot of when you see them as sculptures, and the thing with sculpture is that either viewer can go into the room and walk around it. Right. So how do you deal with that?
I guess I am building a sculpture, but it is definitely like I'm always thinking about maybe like where the first kind of shot is. So it is more like a tableau, I would say, or like a diorama. So it is a sculpture, but it's not like maybe really a sculpture.
Old sculpture. Yeah. You had one, I don't remember the great one, but it had like this handheld sort of feel, the camera, and you could hear the wind with the clouds, lots of clouds going by. It was just really nice, where it felt like, I feel like I'm outside looking at this giant
is it
totem.
The first one? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, with the blonde hair.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that one I was able to use a track. So I actually had like a physical track in the studio. So that one was less like static in a way, and less like and actually really more like built like a physical object, like a 3-dimensional object.
Cool. And then you had the split screen, which was really nice. Why did you have the split screen? What was the
I was looking at like Brian De Palma, I think, a lot. You know, he uses like a lot of split screen to show, like especially when like something like bad is, when there was like a murder taking place, and he shows like the woman's face, and then there's like the killers coming. I don't know. I just like just kind of like looking at that.
Because I was thinking like video games and stuff like that.
Right? Yeah. Like that you have like, then you have like multiple views kind of. Yeah. It's like there was like a lot going on, when I just kind of let the game run, and then so I just wanted to show like kind of more multiple views, and then one camera was more like her close up, you know, it was like the starlet, and the other one was more like the action,
the long
shot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really nice going back and forth between them and just feeling the movement when the camera went over. Yeah, and then the one, can you just explain the process and how it worked? The one with coding, that like you randomized the sort of cameras and even what was going on in the animation?
Yeah, the camera wasn't so much randomized, it was a set animation, but what was randomized was like what objects and like the colors that were coming out, that were spitting out. So I built it kind of like just using kind of like 3D software. So I built like a 3D animation, but then I brought that into a video gaming software. I use Unity, and then I was just coding like, you know, it was like kind of more like, you know, if this object spits out, then it's kind of like cause and effect, you know, like coding behaviors, kind of like, or if this, you know, if this happens, then that triggers something else happening.
And then was it triggered by people moving throughout the gallery?
No.
Oh, it was just like randomized?
Yeah, it's just kind of randomized.
Cool.
So it's kind of like it's like a generative kind of piece, right? So like generating like stuff. The object, yeah, the stuff.
And then it ended up on fire?
Yeah, at one point it was just like, sometimes it would glitch out, just because I had little like garbage bombs that would spit out sometimes and just like explode parts of the sculpture, and then they would like fall, and then there was like too many, I guess, that happened at one time, and she was just on fire. On fire. It was actually like really.
You didn't know that there was like this unexpected visual.
Yeah, it was really nice, beautiful. It's like a happy accident.
Oh, good. I forgot my next question, but you talked about failure too, and I love failure, and I think it's really important to like the process of making art and, you know, and taking risks and stuff like that. But what does it mean to you in your process and all that stuff?
Well, I think since I came to animation so late, I'm always like kind of fumbling with it a bit, and like a lot of my decisions are kind of like about like kind of trying to deal with my mistakes. And I think like so, and that's just kind of how I work. It's like my process. Like, okay, that looks like janky, or that looks like weird. How do I fix that? And so I have this kind of like really collage kind of like aesthetic.
Painterly approach.
Like, that's like messed up. I gotta hide that with like, I'll throw a GIF on top of that part, or change this with like. So, I mean, in that way, it's been actually like a good thing for me. And also, I don't know, like I mean, I made a lot of like embarrassing work, like where I just had myself in front of the camera, and I just, if I hadn't done that, I don't think I would be making what I'm making, or like I wouldn't have discovered it, you know, because I just kind of had to really kind of embarrass myself to get it. I don't know how else to talk about it.
It makes sense though, because otherwise, if you're always being guarded, you're never allowing yourself to make what you should be making, or like what you want to make.
And I made like a lot of bad paintings too, you know, just I have so much bad work just kind of sitting in pieces all around. I don't know.
That's funny. Because I was thinking of that too, because if you're taking like an artistic approach to like making videos or dealing with these sort of like slick special effects and computer animation, it is a lot about just making mistakes and using it badly, and then it becomes like a really nice aesthetic, you know, not totally. And adding to it, which is cool. Or just trying to find that jankiness in this really medium that's supposed to be slick, you know? Yeah. That was not a question. And then what else? Maybe just your relationship with, I guess you talked about a bit like your nostalgia for like My Little Pony and stuff like that, and just that, just being in this world where we're seduced. It's like you're commenting on how consumerism is horrible and it's destroying the world, but then you're also at the same time seduced, I'm guessing, by it. You know what I mean? Like, how do you feel about that in your work and just in your life?
Well, my childhood was so wrapped up in these like plastic toys, and I think it's interesting, like with consumerism, how it targets kind of children, where you have the show, and then you have like the toys, and then the toys, it like intercepts into like a child's like fantasy world and like their creativity, and like it becomes part of it, and then it becomes like so personal that I just like, I see like My Little Pony and I love it so much because it was like it's just, I have these like such like kind of amazing memories of my like fantasy world that I created with them. But at the same time, it was just like consumerism, you know? And so there's kind of like this real dark side to it. And then I think about, you know, everyone, there's like all this fear now about like plastic off-gassing and like, like what was in, you know, what was in those toys or whatever. And, you know, there's always like articles in New York Times, like don't eat like containers with this plastic, you know, everyone's like scared. And just like dealing with that where it's like a real positive, like warm feeling, but at the same time, it's like junk or like it's like maybe not so great for us, but I don't know.
The feelings are still there.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. And what was I gonna ask this? I guess just ideas of using lots of feminine imagery. And just how that works in your work, and if, what your interest in it, sort of thing.
I mean, I just think that's how I kind of process things. It's very much like connected to like kind of like thinking of myself like female, physical, like dealing with the environment in like a more like bodily way. Like I think it's just like that it's like personal to me. I guess I'm like an old school kind of feminist, but
well, it's the same thing as like like embracing femininity and feminine and soft and stuff like that is kind of revolutionary instead of, you know, pretending to be something else. But and also we have 5 minutes left. So do you want to talk a bit about your project you're working on now?
So it's like a 3-part piece. I think I showed you like it was like 1.5 parts. So it's a female character who's she's trying to deal with like some emotional issues by like going to this yoga retreat, but she's having like doubts about herself because she's putting herself out there like on Instagram, and then she's not getting the response that she wants. But it's very much also that she's like this organism that's like trying to like function with like fluids, and it's kind of like breaking down and trying to like find like kind of like enlightenment or like to separate herself. But so it's gonna, the pieces she's doing, I think it ended right when like it was in the middle of the yoga sequence. So there's gonna be like more yoga kind of happening, and then she becomes this like mountain character.
Cool. And is there gonna be lots of dialogue?
No, it's just gonna be all just like sound,
images
and
nice.
just like sound.
And the characters, like I feel like a lot of your characters like work as totems or as sculptures. Is it gonna like she's gonna be sort of an object in a sense?
Yeah, she becomes an object. So she would see she's kind of like she's meditating and she's becoming more of like an object, but then she's actually gonna become the mountain that's behind her. She's gonna like kind of meld with that and become this like more like bobblehead character.
Okay, nice. And I think we are out of time. Are you ready for Q&A? Oh, we can keep going? Okay. Okay, great. And then how long do you think it's going to be?
I'm not sure. Maybe probably under 10 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then do you want to talk about your projects in Denver? We were talking about that last night, but it just sounded really cool. Just the project you had done with collaborated with the person who puts all the digital murals everywhere. Oh
yeah, you guys should apply. It's called Supernova. It's a computer animation festival in Denver, Colorado. And so for like one day, the festival is all throughout this downtown Denver, and they have all these LED screens that are, the city worked out with the theater district that half the time that those LED screens should be used for like cultural like content, so it's not just advertising, which is amazing. Yeah. So they play all throughout the year, but the one day a year that it's just like animation for the whole day, you know, and it's like it's on all these different screens all throughout downtown Denver.
And you did a big billboard.
Yeah, I showed it briefly. So that was one piece I did. I also showed one of the other pieces on another screen, and I don't know, it's just, yeah, it's great to be like in Denver and see all this crazy animation like everywhere, all throughout the city.
Like a different art space than a gallery.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, I made this like weird character, and they're like up there, like next to an advertisement for a car. It's just, like, kind of funny.
breaking the system. Okay, so we're gonna go to Q&A now. Is there a mic we can pass around?
Come over here.
So just come over there if you have a question. Any questions? Anybody? Yeah.
Go to the spotlight.
Oh yeah.
It's a lot of pressure.
Very dramatic.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I really like your work. It's
Oh,
really
thank
cool.
you.
I enjoyed it. And it occurred to me that you're being critical of the content in your work, but it still really looks nice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that you find it aesthetically appealing,
Mm-hmm.
even though you're using it to show your dislike for something. So can you talk more about that juxtaposition?
Yeah, I think I'm just like, I kind of like to use seduction to kind of bring people in to like actually look at the work. You know, it's like, oh, look, this is like I'm using like pretty colors, and, you know, I'm using like 3D, like kind of flashy effects and everything like that. You know, it's like flashing and people are like drawn to like look at something like that. And I'm using like painterly kind of aesthetics and composition. But then they kind of like keep looking. They kind of like see, oh, it's like actually a little frightening. So I just kind of, I use it to draw people in. And also, I mean, I like the way it looks, you know, like I was a painter. So I enjoy making things that have like a kind of aesthetic, like nice quality to it. But then I kind of like, I can bring them into my world and then get them to like kind of more like think about like what I, like bring in my, like get them to kind of think more about like the concerns that I'm trying to raise. So.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question, anybody? Yeah, thanks, Shane. This is Shane Beam, a 2D animator who also works in Blender.
Oh, cool.
Hey.
Hi.
So I was just curious if, okay, this might be a strangely worded question. How do you feel like, how do you go about like advertising this and like, because I feel like a lot of your work is maybe like very critical of social media, maybe critical of just a lot of things in that realm. How are you, are there any struggles with like recontextualizing projects that you have that you're trying to get out there, that are you ever forced into anything through social media? Just general?
Well, specifically, like I had a solo show set up, and Verizon was supposed to be one of the sponsors, and I guess they didn't look at the work very carefully. And then they looked at it, and I got a letter saying that they pulled out. They didn't want to use my work. So yeah, I mean, like I think they were seduced at first, but then they didn't realize like how critical it was, and so. I mean, that was the only time like where it was really very like explicit of like, they were like, just like, no, you know, and I was like, oh, I get it, you know. Other times it's been, I think Amy and I were talking about this, just like with how feminine my work is. Like I've had galleries be like, it's too girly, like why don't you make something that's like a little more like masculine or something. But those are like the two actually where people were like, told me like up front, like why, you know. But I'm sure it probably happens other times. I just don't really know, or they don't say. Yeah.
But yeah, the old ideas of aggression as strength.
Yeah.
How to get, no, it's not real.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Shane. Any other questions? Oh. I also want to know what software you use, because you have like live action stuff happening, GIFs.
I use a lot of different software, so I'll just answer this one. So I use Maya, I use PF Track, or I also use like After Effects, like I'll use like tracking software in After Effects. I also use, Maya has like a tracking software. So I use a lot of different trackers. Do you guys, any of you use like motion tracking stuff? Yeah. And then I also use Real Flow, which is like a simulator for liquids.
Oh, okay.
And then then I'll just like output it to like a video editing software. So.
Oh, so output it as like a bunch of movie files and then put them in.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering, like, where does it all come together?
Yeah, I'll just use Premiere.
Okay. Nice. Okay, so we'll do last question. No,
we're done.
we are done. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Thank you so much,
Thank
Katie.
you. Thank you so much.